Somewhere in Antarctica, right now, there's a pile of food buried in the snow that nobody has ever touched. It's been sitting there more than 100 years. Tinned meat, biscuit, fuel, and the men who dragged it out there, by hand, hundreds of miles across the ice, every one of them died doing it. And here's the part I can't get past. They died for nothing. The man they were breaking their bodies to save had already made it out. He was fine, safe, on the far side of the continent. And there was no way on Earth to get word to them, so they just kept going. Hauling supplies out onto the ice, building this long chain of food dumps all the way to the foot of a glacier, for a rescue that was already over. You know the famous half of this story. The ship crushed in the ice, the impossible boat journey, everyone home alive. This is the other half, the men nobody came back for. And the hard part isn't how they died out here, it's why. You already know how this story ends for Shackleton. The ship crushed in the ice. That desperate little boat thrown across hundreds of miles of freezing ocean, every single man brought home alive. It's one of the greatest survival stories we've got, and it earned that. But here's the part nobody tells you. That was never the plan. The escape is just what happened after the plan fell apart. The actual plan? It was madness. Walk across Antarctica, coast to coast, straight through the South Pole, on foot. And there's one brutal problem with that. Nobody can carry enough food to cross a whole continent. You'd starve halfway, buried under the weight of your own supplies. So Shackleton needed a second team, men he would never even meet, working the opposite coast. Their job was to lay a chain of food dumps running south across the ice, all the way to the foot of a glacier, so that when Shackleton came off that glacier, half dead, out of food, there would be something waiting for him. No depots, no Shackleton. And that second team is the one history threw away, the Ross Sea Party. Their ship was the Aurora. Their commander, a hard, one-eyed sailor named Aeneas McIntosh. And before they had laid a single depot, they were already set up to lose. Here's the thing about that second team. They got the scraps. Shackleton kept the money and the good gear for his own side of the trip, the side that would make him a legend. What was left over went to the men on the far coast, the Ross Sea Party. Underfunded, short on nearly everything, and a few of them had never even set foot on ice before. They reached Ross Island in 1915 and moved into whatever shelter they could find, old huts left behind by the expeditions that came before them. One of them was Scott's, the base he'd sailed out from on the trip that killed him. Still standing, his things still on the shelves. That first summer, they started laying the depots, and it nearly broke them. The loads were brutal, the cold was worse, and the dogs just couldn't take it. By the end of the season, most of them were gone. But they'd got the first depots down, and they let themselves believe the worst was behind them. Then, one night in the dark, they lost the ship. May 1915. The Aurora is frozen solid into the ice off Cape Evans, tied up for the long polar winter. Nothing to do now but wait it out. And then, one night, a blizzard comes down out of the dark. It doesn't just rock her, it tears her loose, snaps the mooring cables like threads, rips away the whole slab of ice she's locked into, and drags the entire thing out to sea. The men on shore wake up the next morning to an empty horizon. She's just gone. And here's the thing, that ship was everything. Almost all their food, their clothing, their sledging gear. It was all still aboard her. So now there are 10 men stranded on the coast of Antarctica with the clothes on their backs and whatever rotting scraps got left behind in the old huts. The Aurora wasn't sunk, as it turns out. She was jammed in the drifting pack ice, grinding slowly north for the better part of a year before she finally limped into New Zealand. But the men on shore didn't know that. For all they could tell, the ship was gone for good, and not a single soul alive knew they were still out there. Every reason in the world to just dig in and try to survive the winter. Instead, they went back out to finish the depots. And once you understand why, it stops sounding brave.
So why did they do it? Why go back out onto the ice? Ship gone, no way home.
The answer is almost worse for how simple it is. As far as those men knew, Shackleton was out there right now, somewhere on the far side of the continent, walking, betting his life on a line of food that still wasn't in the ground. If they didn't finish it, he would die. Their own ship being gone didn't change a thing. A man was counting on them. So they went. They stitched their worn-out clothes back together from scraps of old tent canvas. The dogs were dead, so they pulled the sledges themselves, man-hauling. The exact same thing that had worn Scott and his men down and killed them, on this exact same ice just a few years before. They marched deep out onto the barrier, dropping one depot after another. And then, their bodies started to fail. Scurvy. It takes a body apart, slowly, when it's gone too long without fresh food. The gums swell up and turn black. Old scars, long healed, split themselves back open. The joints stiffen and fill with a deep, grinding pain until the legs just give out. One by one, they started to break down. And the first man to go was the last one you'd ever have picked for a place like this. His name was Arnold Spencer Smith. He was the expedition's chaplain, a priest, and its photographer. A soft, bookish man who'd come all the way south to hold Sunday services and take a few pictures. And now, here he was, strapped into a harness, dragging a sledge toward a glacier at the end of the world. They'd reached Mount Hope, right at the foot of the Great Beardmore Glacier, and they laid the last depot, the farthest one. The chain was finished. The job was done. All they had to do now was get home. A few hundred miles back the way they came. And that is when Spencer Smith's legs gave out. The scurvy had taken them. So the others laid him down on the sledge. Think about that for a second. Men who were starving, who had scurvy themselves, who could barely stand. Now, dragging a grown man's dead weight on top of all their gear into the wind, day after day after day. They pulled him like that for more than 40 days. Some days they made a mile. Some days a blizzard pinned them flat to the ice while the food ran lower and lower. And he knew exactly what he was costing them. He kept apologizing, kept begging them to just leave him behind and save themselves. They wouldn't do it. On the 9th of March, 1916, out on the open barrier, Arnold Spencer Smith died. On the sledge, his friends were still pulling. They buried him there in the snow. And then, the ones still standing picked the ropes back up and kept walking north. They were so close to home now. And being close to home is exactly what killed the next two. They made it to Hut Point. Frostbitten, half dead, riddled with scurvy, but they'd made it. And the main base at Cape Evans was just a little further on, just across one last stretch of frozen sea ice. Now, sea ice is not solid ground. It looks solid, but it can crack and blow out to open water in minutes with no warning at all. It's only safe once it's frozen good and hard, and this ice hadn't. Everyone knew it hadn't. But two of the men, McIntosh, the commander, and a young fellow named Victor Hayward,
They just couldn't stand to wait. Maybe the scurvy had fogged their thinking. Maybe they just couldn't face one more night out in the cold, that close to a warm hut. So, on the 8th of May, 1916, against everything the others begged them not to do, the two of them walked out onto that ice, heading for Cape Evans. The rest of them stood and watched the two figures shrink away into the white. And they said out loud that it was a mistake. And then the weather came down. When it finally lifted, they went out and followed the two sets of footprints across the ice. The tracks ran on for a while, and then they just stopped, right at the edge of a fresh black crack, where the ice those two men had been standing on had shattered in the storm and blown out to sea, and taken them with it. No bodies, no graves. Just two lines of footprints walking out onto the ice and open black water where the ice used to be. That was 3 men gone. And here's the thing, by the time they died out there, everything they had suffered for was already completely a waste.
Because the Ross Sea Party never knew the truth.
The whole time they were out there, hauling a dying priest across the barrier, losing McIntosh and Hayward through the ice, Shackleton wasn't coming. He'd never even started the crossing. Over on the other coast, his ship, the Endurance, had been trapped in the pack and slowly crushed to pieces, months before the walk was supposed to begin. He never set foot on the continent. Not one step of the crossing ever happened. That famous story everybody knows, the lifeboat and the mountains and every man saved, that's the story of the whole plan collapsing before it started. Which means the depots never had a point. Every dump they built, every 60 miles they crawled across, every tin of food they buried for a starving man to dig up, all of it for someone who was never going to reach that glacier. Not one of those depots was ever used. 3 men died finishing perfectly a job a disaster on the other side of the world had already turned into nothing. And they went to their graves never knowing it. The 7 who lived were finally picked up in January 1917. The Aurora came back for them, patched up at last, and the man standing on her deck was Shackleton himself, come to collect the survivors who'd nearly died stalking a rescue he never needed. They'd done everything he asked, and when the story got written down, the world kept his half and quietly lost theirs.
The Endurance became a legend. Books, films, documentary after documentary, the greatest survival story ever told. And the men on the Ross Sea, the ones who actually finished the job and actually died doing it, became a footnote. Spencer Smith, still out there in the barrier. McIntosh and Hayward, somewhere under the sea off Ross Island, with nothing to mark where they went in. 3 men who did every single thing that was asked of them, and did it right, for a rescue that had already been called off without anyone bothering to tell them. That's the part that gets me. Not that they failed, they didn't fail, they pulled it off. It just cost them everything and ended up meaning nothing, and almost nobody alive could tell you their names. So now you know them. If you want more of the ones the history books left out in the cold, the teams that finished last and got forgotten first, subscribe and stick around. They never came back. The least we can do is know they were here.